Last week, I shared about embracing change, starting with awareness of how circumstances are affecting you and learning how to deal with them effectively. And ultimately, learning to be able to direct the change around you so that you're not a victim, but you're actually leading the change around you. This week, I wanted to go a little bit more into how to become subject over your circumstances, and specifically by taking more ownership over key areas of your life. So let's start with studying what is the nature and value of an ownership mindset. I looked in the dictionary, and there was definition of ownership according to the Macmillan Dictionary was legal possession of something, usually something big and valuable. Okay, so that's ownership. It's like owning a car or a house or a business. But there was also another definition that I found that was interesting. It said an attitude of accepting responsibility for something and taking control of how it develops. So these are two different definitions. One is more the kind of a practical, substantial with the legal possession of something. One is more a perspective or an attitude. And I think both are very important. To help distinguish the difference between, or to understand what an owner mindset is, I thought it would be helpful to differentiate between a owner and a renter mindset. Has anyone rented a car before or rented a house or apartment? How is it different from having ownership over that house or car? Some key differences, for example, a renter tends to expect the landlord to fix things, and the owner is responsible to fix them. But in return, the renter pays the owner rent, of course, and the owner can make money from the rent that is paid. But another distinction that I noticed that when you're a renter, you tend not to take care of things well. I'm just as guilty of this as well. But I noticed that, when we got our property here, our home even, it was a rental location before, and really things kind of were not fully taken care of. Whereas if you buy straight from an owner, the house tends to be in a better condition. This also applies to our own churches. Some show a lack of needed care, and some are really well built and were even built from the ground up, and they look fantastic. It all really depends on the level of ownership, or rather, if you have an ownership mindset or a renter mindset around a property. Let's take a deeper look at what it means to have ownership. There's a passage from Father Moon I'd like to read. Regardless of the opposition a person faces, the one who gives the most love becomes the owner. Those individuals who love more, invest more, give more, and forget what they have given will become central figures. This is a universal law. So basically what Father Moon is saying is that the one who loves and takes care of something the most becomes the true owner. Now, how about the benefits of ownership? There are several benefits that I could think of. One is that when you have legal possession of anything, you tend to take care of it more. Also, not only do you take care of it, but you invest in its development. Ownership also gives you a sense of pride, confidence, and you tend to become more responsible when you're an owner of something versus if you're renting something. I remember like when I rented cars, I wouldn't be as careful. I mean, there's still, concern about insurance and things like that. But basically, I can speed or just not be as careful, right? But if you're an owner of your car, you tend to be careful where you park and just everything so that you minimize the potential damage to the car. One concept that really resonated with me when I was researching on this topic is that this concept of private property is the foundation of not only prosperity, but of freedom itself. Let's read a passage from Father Moon to go deeper into the spiritual value of ownership. From the perspective of the principle of creation, you must take full responsibility for your own actions. Even though God carries a 95% portion of responsibility, we must take responsibility for the remaining 5%. These two combined make 100%. The reason for this principle is that God wants us to participate in his creation so we can be given the privilege and authority of co-creators. This principle of our portion of responsibility is a very powerful and important principle to understand and to apply in our lives. God gave us the freedom to take responsibility for our actions so that we can become co-creators. This is a powerful statement. God is giving us the authority of co-creators by giving us that freedom of responsibility. The more we exercise this God-given right, the more we resemble God and the greater freedom we can experience in our lives. Okay, enough concept. Let's take a look at some examples of taking ownership. Let's read from another passage from Father Moon. When you're sent to a location for the providence, you have to be able to take responsibility for yourself. Someone who cannot be responsible for themselves cannot have another mission. Only when one can be responsible for oneself can they take on other responsibilities. Basically, what Father Moon is saying here is that in order to take on greater responsibilities, you need to be able to take care of your own personal matters, right? You can have the vision of trying to save the world or save your community, but if you can't take care of the basics of your own, finances, relationships, all those kind of things, you're not much service to the greater community. For example, let's look at finances. This is a common area of struggle for many of us. I remember one time I was, I got appointed to a new role, and I wasn't satisfied with the pay, the salary. I mean, it is a ministry role, so there's always a limit in the nonprofit realm. But I felt like, given my background, experience, and my productivity, that I should be earning more. So I took it upon myself. I took responsibility. I did my research. I put together a whole proposal looking at, how much funds were raised under my leadership and how much productivity there was, and also comparables with other nonprofits and yada, yada, yada. So I prepared this wonderful, beautiful proposal, brought it to the board, and they basically declined. And I was so frustrated. I was like, can't they understand the value that I'm bringing to this organization? I felt undervalued and misunderstood, and really getting to a dark place. But at the same time, I felt responsible to kind of stay in my position. I couldn't just quit. That was kind of the situation. So anyway, after much reflection, I decided that instead of depending on the organization, the nonprofit, to provide more salary for me, that I would actually take initiative to raise my own funds. So I decided to study, get trained in coaching as a professional skill, and was able to, over the course of many years, develop my own proficiency and my own side practice and business around coaching, so that outside of my regular hours and my regular 40-hour, the work or job, I was able to also generate more income through my side gig. So this really gave me a much greater sense of independence and freedom, and I was no longer, upset or angry at my employer, because I felt like I was able to take things into my own hands in this area of finance. And instead of becoming dependent, I was able to even contribute more to the organization because of that initiative. So that's just one example of taking ownership over an area of personal finance. Another common area to look at is in relationships. Let's read. Anyone who does not provide for their relatives, and especially for their own household, has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. This is from 1 Timothy chapter 5:8. When I first read this, I thought it was a very strong statement. And the context in the Bible was referring to taking care of widows and elders in a community. I know in our history, there's been a lot of sacrifices made. Many of our parents' generation had to give up a lot, including care of their families, in order to do their mission that they were called to. But in this day and age, I really feel that despite the different responsibilities that we have in our mission, in our jobs, that it's important that we take responsibility over our important relationships in the family. So I remember when I first took on this role as the president, I knew I was going to be super busy. But I made a very conscious effort to continue to fulfill my role as a husband, really to invest in time with my wife despite my busy schedule. So it took a concerted effort. And I want to encourage everyone that, you might have a circumstance where you're busy because of your work or your mission or whatnot, but that shouldn't take away from your responsibility in taking care of important relationships. Another very important area to take ownership is, or greater ownership is, in your life of faith. Let's read. For a person to polish his heart to the point that it becomes as clear as crystal, he absolutely must spend time in direct conversation with his heart in an environment where he is away from the world and alone with his heart. It will be a time of intense loneliness, but the moment that we become close to our hearts is a time of prayer and meditation. It is a time when we can take ownership over our hearts, when we isolate ourselves from the noise around us and allow our thoughts to settle. We can see into the deepest parts of our hearts. So in our life of faith, there are many things that, it's one thing to, for example, attend morning devotion or, taking responsibility to develop your life of faith habits. But one common challenge that I've noticed is that if we put our faith too much on our central figures, our spiritual leaders, and not enough on our own foundational relationship with God, then you run the risk of when someone you respect, or an elder, or your even central figure, your direct kind of spiritual leader, falters, you're at risk to also falter yourself. And I've experienced this many times where someone above me, because of the situation, and again, there's no blame or judgment towards them, but I noticed that when people put too much faith in a person, then when that person, or if that person falters, it affects their life of faith tremendously. So, of course, we're not immune to that. We'll naturally be affected by that, but it's so important to establish your own foundation of faith so that even if people around you, even your direct central figures, if they're wavering, that you're still able to stay solid. I mean, one quick example This happens, I think, it's a common challenge is, working with in-laws, right? I remember when we first got engaged, my parents for the first year weren't so kind of happy with my engagement, which is kind of ironic. But I felt like it was my commitment to my wife was actually based on my commitment to God. And so despite how they may have felt at that time, I was committed to this relationship. And this was really important, especially during those early years, to really secure that relationship. So again, when it comes to the blessing, which is one of our holy sacraments, and we honor our marriages and so on and so forth, it's really important that outside of someone else's recommendation or your parents' involvement, that ultimately you are responsible for your choice and your commitment to love your spouse, no one else. And so that will be very important in your life of faith. Now, another example of ownership beyond your personal life is taking ownership in your community. So I remember one time I was, approached by actually Pastor Crescentia. She, I don't know if she was a pastor at that time. Anyway, she was on the board of UTS, and she had asked me to consider, giving feedback on the UTS program. And at that time, I was not really interested. I felt like there were many kind of challenges with the program, and I expressed that to her. And she brought it to the board, and she actually asked me to get more involved in coming up with solutions for making a program that would be meaningful and attractive. So I found myself actually giving a lot of feedback on how I thought it could be done better. And long story short, I ended up asking to, basically said, I am willing to be a student and become a guinea pig in a program, in a master's program, UTS, if I could help design the program to make it work for, working professionals like myself. And I was grateful that they were willing to work with me. And we're able to develop this accelerated program where within 3 years, someone who's working full time could also really complete their degree with a more flexible schedule, a few more options. And again, I saw that there was a need, and I took initiative to make a difference for our community. And that also opened the doors for many new students to join UTS at that time. So why am I saying this? I want to encourage everyone, if you see an area in your community that you feel can be improved, instead of just complaining about its lacking points, I want to encourage you to, share your thoughts, but not just share your thoughts, because everyone has ideas, but get intimately involved in making a positive difference for your community. So it's one thing to be on the sidelines and be like, yeah, I could have been like that too. Yeah, the current program is not for me. It's not flexible. It takes too long to graduate, and nothing would have happened. It would have stayed the same. But I felt there was a way to make it better, and I committed to being part of the process in improving it. And that's why change was able to happen. So I want to encourage you, again, don't just sit on the sidelines complaining or making note of all the things that should be done differently, but get involved. Be the difference. Be a part of making the difference in improving that situation. There's also some examples that I've noticed of initiatives in the community. So one example is something called Project Phoenix. I think it was over a decade ago at this point, but basically there was a tangible notice about the challenge of relationship between the elder generation and the younger generation. So this group got together and decided that we need to spend some substantial time in healing by creating a space where people can communicate and express their hurts of the past and kind of move forward together. And again, this wasn't a headquarters initiative. It was just a few people from the field who felt this was needed. They took the initiative, they created the program, they went from community to community, and it has made a really valuable contribution to communities, not just in America, but throughout the world. Another example is the High Noon program. This is something where there was a specific issue that was affecting our communities, which was pornography. Many couples were being affected, and even singles, and even leaders of our community were not able to continue their leadership because of their struggle around this area. So one couple really stood up and took responsibility over this challenge, decided to develop a program, learn from experts, create a team, and now they have programs that are available so that anyone who's struggling with pornography can get the help that they need to overcome that and become more of their true original selves. One more example I'd like to quickly share that really made a national impact was leadership of CARP in Los Angeles. I remember, there was this real drought of young leadership. And one of the moms there decided, you know what, I'm gonna go and get some young people. And it was amazing. Japanese moms going on the campus. Now, this is not what I'm recommending as an approach, but the determination and the sense of ownership over making it happen, that was moving. And a lot of young members started to connect and join. And a few years later, they were sending hundreds of CARP students to Korea on this Hyojong filial piety pilgrimage trip. And even to a point where we got recognition from Mother Moon herself. So that's another example of initiatives from the field that really made national and global impact. And I want to also go into some examples of ownership from key figures. Let's read. This is probably the most famous verse, well, maybe most or second, where Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they are doing." This is from Luke chapter 23, verse 34. This verse is so powerful because Jesus is basically taking responsibility for the sins of humanity and saying to God that, please forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. I will be responsible to take on their sins and help them reconnect to you. So really having one person to be able to even commit to that level of ownership is what allowed for salvation for humanity at that time. So the power of ownership is that you can make a tremendous impact and difference on the lives of others the more you're able to take ownership. Another key figure is Father Moon. Let's read. What was clear was that I had received a special mission from heaven. It was such a huge and tremendous responsibility. I shuddered in fear to think that I might not be able to handle it on my own. I clung to prayer even more than before in an attempt to quiet my confused heart. So this is a passage that explains what Father Moon was feeling when he accepted the mission from Jesus to continue his mission. And I heard that he actually declined a couple times, saying, I don't know if I can do this. Are you sure that you want me to take this on? And the third time, he basically accepted because he felt like if he didn't take this on, who would do it? But imagine if he declined, right? What would the world be in? The situation of the world. So it's so important when people are able to step up and take responsibility and take ownership, or particularly over God's providence, it makes a huge difference for humanity and for God. And another key example is our Mother Moon. Let's read. After True Father's holy ascension in 2012, I took upon myself a great responsibility. God led me through difficult circumstances and painful trials. Standing before True Father's holy body in 2012, I promised in tears, by the end of my days, I will absolutely bring about the settlement of Cheongguk on this earth. Amazing. Mother stood up at that time, at the most difficult time in our movement's history. But even if we think about it, when she accepted her role as Mother Moon, back when she was 17 years old, she accepted by becoming the wife of Father Moon in holy marriage in 1960. So even back then, she had made this kind of commitment of taking ownership and responsibility as of Mother Humanity. But when Father Moon passed away, she made it very clear that she is still committed to continue that role. And I am so grateful that she did. Because imagine what would have happened if she didn't. So we have so many examples of ownership. I want to just recap by sharing a few tips on how to practice more ownership in your life. Let's read one quick passage here. It is not your external position or status that makes you a true owner. That is determined only by your character and capacity to love. So this is very important. You don't need to have a position per se to have ownership. The examples I gave from the field leaders, they didn't wait for somebody to tell them, this is what you should do. They noticed an issue in their community and they took responsibility to make a difference. Same thing. You may not be a pastor or a ministry leader or whatnot, but that doesn't necessarily have to prevent you from taking ownership. If you participate and take initiative to improve the circumstances, you are expressing more ownership over your community. Now, one caveat I would say at this point is it's important to take ownership, but make sure that you're also practicing alignment. Okay, ownership doesn't mean you just do things on your own. It's in communication with the existing leadership that you're able to express the most ownership. Again, even for Jesus and Father, Mother Moon, it's not just them doing their own thing. It's in relationship to God that they made that commitment of ownership. Let's read another passage. You must act from a position of taking responsibility for something good. On seeing how much you have been able to take responsibility for your actions, all creation should be able to respect you on that basis. Also, good results must be left behind where you have acted. So here are some two other additional quick points. Really taking responsibility. This is something we already talked about, but showing results. Okay, so how do you develop ownership is to not just take initiative, but show good results. Okay, that really helps you develop this sense of ownership. And finally, the secret to taking ownership. Let's read. God wants all of us to gain the wisdom that will allow each one of us to inherit everything he has and to become a true owner. I am referring to the secret wisdom of being able to live for others by investing true love on the basis of God's absolute standard. The prerequisite to becoming a true owner is to first possess the heart of a true parent. So, brothers and sisters, the secret to taking ownership is having a heart of a true parent. So what does that mean? It means instead of expecting others to take care of things, taking responsibility with a parental heart over your family, even over your finances, your work, your mission, your community, and even your own life of faith, to have a parental heart towards yourself, seeing yourself from God's viewpoint. This is what really generates the most powerful sense of ownership, is this having this parental heart over everything. So as we face different challenges in our lives, let's take a moment to reflect on where we may be missing out or giving our power away by blaming others or depending on others to change our circumstances. Instead, let's take full responsibility for our circumstances and take initiative to improve on them. Let's also remember to align our hearts and our minds with what God would want us to do in any given situation. May God bless you and your family this week. Thank you very much.